Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and you know what I have here?
A problem. A problem is what you have. You choose or I will.
Well, she's not wrong. More than 10 is too many, but I swear there's a good reason for this one. Let me tell you about it now. So I have these two smokers side by side for a very good reason. Before we get to our unboxing, first burn, and I picked up a lovely ribeye steak that we are gonna cook on this later today. I just want to give a little bit of a prelude to what's coming and why I think this is a great head-to-head comparison. I picked up my Oklahoma Joe's Highland on clearance late last year, and it's been a key part in helping me make a decision on whether or not I want to upgrade to the second generation Smoke North offset smoker that I ultimately did buy. But what I will say, if you have one of these, or I read in comments all the time in different Facebook groups, if this is your first smoker, it's a no wonder this smoker turns people off of offsets. It's very difficult to use. Not that you can't do it. I think we've absolutely solved it with a couple of mods. You see the extended stack, semi-insulated firebox, but there's no good way of getting around a couple limitations in terms of space. You can only fit 2 to max 3 racks of ribs or 1 brisket. And the second is fire management, because it's a very small firebox. It's very difficult not to have our fire being drawn into our firebox, and every 15 to 20 minutes or so we are adding splits that we need to modify with our saw, break down, and then use our axe, break them down in half. So there's a lot of work, and I couldn't help but imagine what would life be like with a little bit more capacity and way less work. And so Masterbuilt reached out and offered to send me this grill. I want to mention, this is not sponsored, not being paid, not being asked to say anything, but I did not pay for this grill. I paid for this one with my own money. But before the for sale signs go up and the great purge happens in spring, I wanted to take the opportunity of doing this head to head. This is sort of the complete opposite user experience, where we are going to have the ability to control our pit with an app, or using the controller right on there, go anywhere from 225 degrees low and slow or up to 700 degrees in a matter of 15 minutes. And so I wanted to see how these two do head to head. I've already put in the Oklahoma Joe's Highland against my char griller Acorn, and this was the closest in everything I've ever done head to head. These two were almost indistinguishable on those ribs that I did head to head. And so this really has me wondering, it's like, what role does this smoker serve other than to convince people who are new and maybe wanting to get into the hobby? It's way more difficult than it actually is. And so if you're on the fence of saying, I really want to turn out great barbecue, but I don't want to go through a PhD in fire management, this is where things like pellet grills, or now newer innovations like the Gravity series come in, where they give you that set it and forget it experience, and the claim is results comparable to what you could turn out if you were willing to roll up your sleeves and tend your fire all day. That's the claim anyways. We will find out. So without further ado, let's get unboxing and set this up for our first fire. Okay, we've got our Masterbuilt Gravity Series 1050 all together, and it took me all day. It wasn't overly complicated, but this is one of the lengthier grill assemblies that I've done in recent memory. So just shy of about 3.5 hours to get this together. And deep in the instructions was a mandatory or recommended clean burn for about an hour to get off some of those packing chemicals. So I did that. And then after the clean burn, we have to let the grill cool completely and then season it inside. So this was pushing to the end of daylight. So I'm rejoining you the next day when we are ready to get going with our steak. The only thing that I'll mention here is I also took the time to set up the app, which was really easy to do. Even in this sort of far location of the backyard, we're still getting sufficient Wi-Fi that I'm able to connect and control that and pair it to my phone, no problem. So now that we have the break-in burn as well as the seasoning burn ready to go, let me take you through our first official fire as we're getting ready to get our steak. I'll bring it out, we'll season it up, and show you how I'm going to set up for our reverse seared bone-in ribeye. So in terms of fire management and setup, that's it. We apparently now can put our feet up and relax, and the computer will take it from here. We just had to add some charcoal, add a fire starter to get the first little bit of spark going, and the rest is going to be all controlled by our computer controller here. Now I've added inside the grill my Kamado Joe Jr. soapstone. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to use this or not, but I want to record the surface temperature using my IR gun. Typically in the past, any pellet grill that I've used, I used to have a Traeger Pro 575. Searing is just something that pellet grills don't do very well, and I'm really curious if the switch here to charcoal, even the fact that it says we can get up over to 700 degrees, it should make searing a breeze. So whether or not we actually sear with the soapstone or not, I am curious to see what temperature to get. So I'm going to leave it in here, even for the reverse sear portion, just to see, bring it up to temperature and see how hot we get it when we go for our sear. Normally I'm looking for about a surface temperature of around 600 degrees Fahrenheit on my soapstone. So we'll have the choice between cast iron grill grates as well as the soapstone. We also have a choice with our grill grates in terms of smoke and sear, in terms of if we want a slightly smaller contact patch or the wider patch. I like the look of the pointier smoke patch. That's what I'm going to go with for today. Let's close up our hopper and let this come up to temperature. We're going to set everything for a nice low reverse sear. So about 225 to 250 degrees is something that I'm going to set the app for in order to make sure that we are running nice and slow, giving a chance to break those collagens down really, really gently. This is an important step. If you cook our steak really hot and we sear first, sear the other side, and sort of give it that 8 minutes per side, we're not giving enough time to properly break down all of those collagens and getting a really super tender, juicy product. So I found if I can stretch it as long as possible, low and slow, bring it off, let it rest, and give it then a blast sear at the end, I get a much better result. So I'll rejoin you in a little bit when we've got this up to temperature. Let's go grab our steak and season it up. Okay, so this is our ribeye that we're going to be reverse searing today. It's easy. It's almost about 4 fingers thick. So this is a nice thick borderline prime rib roast. So it's right between steak and a roast. So I did give this an overnight dry brine by just applying a light coating of Diamond Crystal kosher salt. This is going to help just really enhance the natural beef flavor and make sure that we retain more overall moisture throughout the cook. It's not going to push as much out, and so that if we were to weigh the steak at the end without a dry brine versus with a dry brine, we're going to have more net volume or weight by the end of it. It's absolutely a game changer if you haven't tried it. So I'm just going to get a little bit of a rub made up. I'm going to use my pepper cannon as my measuring cup here. So I'm just going to fill up 1 capful of pepper, add 1 capful of salt. I'll take you fast forward while I grind this up really quickly. I'm using just a mixture of peppercorns. So there's some red, white, as well as just normal black peppercorns in here. I'll rejoin you in a second. Okay, that looks good, just below the line. Fill to the same spot with salt, or a little bit less, because again we did give this a dry brine, so don't want to over salt it, but I like a little bit of salt on the outside. That salt that we added in the dry brine is going to go all the way through the steak, but I like just in my crust a little bit of kick of salt, so just go a little bit less than pepper. So we're a little bit under 50-50 salt and pepper, and I'm going to go for about 1/3 of whatever you're using for measurement. So again, with a cap of onion powder and the same 1/3 of garlic powder. So our next step here is to add a bit of a binder, and I absolutely love something like truff hot sauce. Any hot sauce works great because it typically has a little bit of acidic or vinegar content, and the heat you're not going to taste when we cook it, unless you go with something like, you know, scorpion pepper, ghost pepper, or Carolina Reaper, or something like that. You're not going to taste hot sauce. It's very expensive, so we're going to want to use this in moderation, but this is really, even though I love hot sauce, the only time I use this is as a binder, since it just adds some extra umami depth. I'm just going to put a little bit on the outside here as a smear. Looks good. Let's mix up our rub here, and we'll coat both sides evenly. Pat that in. Always pat, don't rub, it'll come right off. Take our meter probe, insert right past the line. We are ready to get this on. All right. We are up to temperature quicker than I could season this. I think it was only about 4 or 5 minutes, and we are already at 225 degrees. So I'm just going to place the probe towards the chimney, even though there's not towards our collector. There's not really a chimney that's going to get the draw going this way, but since the fan is moving air across, and I've got the bone side down to act as a bit of a natural heat shield to protect against any of that heat that's radiating upwards. Let's close this up, let it cook, set up the meter app. So I mentioned before the meter app is something that I like to use just because I have more familiarity with it. I've used different grills with probe systems, and I found that they've maybe made a choice with the algorithm of showing a really flat line. And when I test it with other probes, it doesn't have to be a meter probe, but any other third-party probe, you're seeing a lot more up and down. And this has sort of taught me to be a little bit suspicious of flat lines with an integrated controller. I'm not saying that's the case here today, but I really want to track both ambient temperature as well as a really consistent internal temperature. So I'm going to set my meter probe up for 110 degrees Fahrenheit, as that's going to, just based off previous experience, continue to carry over cooking anywhere as 5 to 10 degrees. We're going to let that rest until we see the chart starting to come back down the other way. And while we're resting it, we're going to crank the temperature. On the box it said this will only take a couple minutes, so we'll probably be at 700 degrees before our steak is done resting. But I'll rejoin you in a little bit when I've got an update and we're ready to go from our reverse sear to our sear portion. So I'm glad I took the opportunity to use the meter, as it gave me some really valuable information. We started off with our smoker set to 225 degrees Fahrenheit, and while I saw 225 on the meter almost immediately, it quickly settled down to about 20, at some points nearly 30 degrees below that. So it's just hovering right around 200, 201 for a good duration, for about 30 minutes. This is taking a long time. So I wanted to bump it up to 250 degrees after 30 minutes. And once again, I saw the same sort of spike up to 250 and then settling about 20, 25 degrees down below, sort of in that mid 220s. And so after yet another 30 minutes, I bumped it up to 275 and I saw the exact same pattern. So this is helping me understand just a little bit more in terms of where the sensor on the grill is reading temperature versus where our food is actually sitting, so I can adjust that for next time, knowing that the grid temperature is going to be about 20 degrees lower than sort of the dome temperature, which is really not even a dome temperature on our Masterbuilt. Is there's no information on it. It just says things like smoking or barbecue or grilling or searing, but it doesn't give us any actual temperature indications. We have to rely on what we see on the app or on the control panel. So the meter has said our steak is getting ready to pull it off, so I'll bring you nice and close. Let's get it off the grill, let it rest. And while it's resting, I'm gonna make up some sear sauce in anticipation that once we crank the heat all the way up to maximum 700 degrees Fahrenheit for our searing, we get our soapstone hot enough to maybe even try using it so I can share my double sear technique that is absolutely amazing. So I'll rejoin you in a couple minutes after you see how to make the sear sauce, and we will be ready to actually try our sear and record the temperature with an IR gun to see if it gets close enough or hot enough to be able to pull this off. See you in a minute. So while our steak's resting, let's just make up a really quick sear sauce. So if you haven't heard of sear sauce before, it's just basically going to be some fat and some extra flavor compounds. And I want to share a little trick that I've tried in a couple competitions, either with friends or in the local community, where we're actually going to do a double sear. We're going to go for maybe that flat top, pending if it gets up hot enough, and this is where the sear sauce will come in, followed by going for our grill marks. This will make one of the absolute best crusts you've ever had. So to start, we're just going to get a little bit of mayonnaise. Let me shake this to the bottom here. Want the real stuff, not the synthetic. Maybe about 2 tablespoons worth if we were measuring. Next, either some prepared garlic, or if you have some cloves, you can mince a little bit of that up nice. And again, we're going to go for about 3 teaspoons worth. A healthy pinch of Malden's smoked salt. You want some of that texture, some of the coarse grains, so it'll help give it a little bit of extra character. And then I'm just going to set my pepper cannon to a little bit of a coarser grade pepper, so we get some of that in there as well. And to thin it out, a little bit of red wine vinegar. This would be about half a teaspoon. Let's mix that up. And that is about the right consistency. Meet you over by the pit. Okay, our steak's gone all the way to 128 degrees in the rest. So that was lots of carryover cooking from pulling it at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's check our soapstone and see if we're getting close to that 600 I was looking for. Not quite there. We're about 550, but I think that's close enough. We're gonna give it a try. So what I'm gonna do is just brush on some of our sear sauce onto our ribeye here, coat both sides. All right, let's do our first part of our sear. Give this a flip. So now that we've got a great looking crust, let's start our 2-stage steer. There we go, right on those grates. keep the heat in the grill. So there we go. There's our two-stage crust where we have a bit of that Maillard reaction from our sear sauce, as well as some grill lines you can see on each side, which will help give it that really nice presentation. Let's get this on the board. Go slice into it for a taste test. Well, our ribeye certainly looks fantastic. And I know I sort of alluded to this earlier, but you may be wondering, you know, James, if this is ultimately going to be sort of the Masterbuilt versus an inexpensive offset, why are we starting with a grilled steak? Well, I started with a grilled steak because this is something that the Oklahoma Joe's Highland can't do unless you're going to go directly above the firebox, or if you're looking at a pellet grill category, as I've showed here, a quick reference again back to my Traeger sear, you just can't really get a good sear. So I wanted to start with proving out, can we use this as a grill first? And judging by what we look at, we haven't tasted it yet, I think the answer is yes. Our next step from here will be a nice low and slow cook to see how it performs on smoke flavor. So make sure you've got the notification bell on so you're alerted when that comes out. But enough about that one. Let's worry about today and see how we did. Let's come nice and close, slice into it. All right, can't wait. See how we did. Follow along the bone here. Now I like to cut that way. If we were going to do something like a prime rib, we could go this way, but I'm going to go for a steak cut. So let's just remove our string here, slice in, give us a second to bloom, see how we did. That looks really good. That's going to bloom into a really nice medium rare and pretty good edge to edge doneness. We're not getting a large band of sort of well done, then medium rare. This is looking pretty good. Let's get a couple slices. A little bit of Malden's finishing salt here just for a little added pop. Let's dig in. Okay, the best part. Cheers. Tenderness is there, juiciness is there, beef is the hero is there. That overnight dry brine along with our steps from the binder to our rub and our sear sauce have come together beautifully. I think the only thing holding this back from being a 10 out of 10 is the crust and the Maillard reaction. This double sear that I normally do on something like my Kamado Joe turns out an amazing crust, and we weren't quite able to get that surface temperature up into that mid 600 range that I want. So we're about 100 degrees shy of the absolute perfect temperature, and I did let that sit for over a half an hour, and it cooked the entire time. So it was heat soaked to make sure we gave it every chance we could to get it up to temperature. So outside of like a comparable sear to one of the world's best sears, it's not quite there. But if I flash back to that Traeger Pro 75 that I used to have in the sear, or any other pellet grill that I've seared on, this is leaps and bounds ahead of them. So we know it can grill, but can it smoke? So that's going to be our next experiment. Make sure you got that notification bell turned on so you're alerted. That's it for today though. I'm James from Soakin' Dad Barbecue signing off, and I hope you really enjoyed the unboxing and first impressions of the Masterbuilt Gravity Series 1050 smoker. See you next time, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.